I'm John Duval. Welcome to the Scriptural Way Bible Study. The Scriptural Way Bible Study is brought to you by the Seminole Point Church of Christ, located at 16300 North May Avenue, Oklahoma City. On behalf of the elders and members of the Seminole Point Church of Christ, I would like to thank you for your interest in spiritual matters. Now, let's take our Bibles and seek the Scriptural Way. Good evening. Welcome to the Scriptural Way broadcast. I'm John Duval.
And I'm Dale Decker.
Welcome to our Bible study. You know, Dale, it's wonderful that we have an opportunity like this to sit down over these wonderful electronic means, if you would, to study the Word of God.
That is truly a statement that is unbelievable.
It is. It really is.
When you consider the modern technology that we have today.
Yes.
And that we're able to get over the internet and talk to a large audience.
Yep. And I tell you what, in 60 years from now, we'll be able to talk to the colony on the moon just like this.
60 years from now, they'll just transport us there.
Yeah. Well, me, I could still be around. You might be.
Hey, I plan on living to be 133 years old.
Well, John is unable to be with us again this evening. He and his family went out of town for vacation, and we hope that God will give them a safe journey there. So what we have asked Brother Jacob Gwynn, and I'll have him here in just a second to tell you some about their broadcast on Thursday night, but we've asked him to Skype in with us this evening and join us for our study. So Jacob, kind of introduce yourself and kind of tell the folks about what y'all do on Thursday night.
Thanks for having me, John. Good to be here. Yeah, we have a program on Thursday night at 8 o'clock Central Time, 30 minutes after yours, at thevirtualbiblestudy.com, where we do a similar type format. We discuss different topics every week. And so if anyone's interested in joining us there, they can find us at thevirtualbiblestudy.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. You know, I've been following y'all's progress probably for about the last year and a half now, if that long, and y'all have really made some developments as far as the video looks great, and the audio sounds very good. And then if you'll notice a new chat room that we're using, well, I got the idea from the virtual Bible study. And so I borrowed that idea from him, and we've brought in something different. So.
No use everybody hurting at the same time. One of us can experiment and share what we learn with others.
That's exactly right. For those who are watching live, I want to let you know about some of the new features about the Meebo chat room. You'll see below the viewing window there. And you should see this on both the audio-only stream as well as the video stream. No longer is it connected with Ustream. If you want to choose a nickname for yourself, just click on the word nickname or edit nickname, and it'll let you type in your name, what you want to be known by. And I see that we already have several that have done that. And any other guests coming in, if you'd like to participate in the study, we invite you to do the same thing. It kind of gives us an idea of who you are, and if you wouldn't mind, let us know where you are from, so we kind of have a pretty good idea as to where everyone is hailing from tonight as they join us for the study. Well, Dale, we're going to be talking about a little bit different of a subject. We have finished our study of the armor of God, and in a couple weeks we're going to be starting on a study of the home. But in the meantime, one of the subjects that we're going to be looking at really, on one hand, pertains immediately to the day and age and the technology that we live in. But in reality, this lesson could have been taught 60 years ago, or this lesson could be taught 60 years from now, because it basically deals with our behavior towards other people. And so if you haven't downloaded a copy of the lesson, Rules and Warnings for Social Networking, please do so. You know, someone of Dale's generation and Jacob's father, the idea of Twitter and Facebook is somewhat new and just almost outside their realm of comprehension. Almost. Dale's pretty smart. And even me, I'm 43 years old, and there's still a lot of stuff about this new social networking that I scratch my head over and say, man, how do they get into it so much? And then you got younger people who they do it in their sleep. And our younger generation is facing this, and there are some rules and warnings that must be heeded. You know, Jacob, you go back a number of years, and the best thing that we could do is call someone on the telephone or write them a letter. That was the
Yep.
extent of our social networking.
Yeah, I remember when I went to college, email was new, and my dad and I communicated over email. We thought we were really doing great, but there's things you can do now, and there's no comparison.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Matter of fact, you know, you can teach your dog how to do a trick, and you can let your 200 followers on Twitter know that your dog just picked up a little bitty four-leaf clover with his paw. Then you can turn around and share a picture of that with your 500 friends on Facebook, along with a
Yeah,
video.
that's right. Yeah.
And so we've got people sharing things and just all sorts. And I'm afraid that too many of our folks, both young and old, have kind of gotten caught in this trap because there are some definite downsides to this. We've got to keep it in mind. When we talk about social networking, all we're talking about is your network of friends, family members, sometimes people you work with, acquaintances. And we're talking now today about how you communicate with them, and there are rules and warnings and so forth. So before we step into that, Dale, any thoughts or comments?
No, I mean, what you're saying there is exactly right. There's always been rules and warnings for socializing with friends and relatives. But maybe it's even more critical today because of the internet, because you know, oftentimes we are the only Bible that people who are not Christians read.
Right.
And our actions over the internet, whether it be Facebook, whether it be Twitter, whether it be email, is read by a number of people.
That's right.
And you know, if we're doing Bible things by Bible ways, we don't have to worry about it.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And you know, John, the temptations aren't really any different in social media than they would be, 50 years ago. They're presenting themselves in a different avenue, but the same kind of temptations. There's nothing new here. Just the devil has a new avenue to tempt us. In 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11, we read, "Lest Satan should get us an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices." So we need to spend some time thinking about how Satan going to tempt me. He's not going to tempt me necessarily in any different kind of temptation, but he may present it in a different way, and we need to be aware of that.
That's true. That's true. We need to anticipate the possible abuse to any new technology and how to use that. I think it's a very, very good point. Well, what I'd like to do this evening is I think there are 8 rules. I have to count, and I forgot to count. So about 8 or 9 different rules we're going to look at. And we'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions or comments, the easiest way is to join us in the chat room. But if you're unable to do that, you can also email them to us at questions@seminolpointcfc.org. We do have a form that you can click to fill out on our viewing page as well if you'd rather do that, and it uses the same email route as well. Well, let's go ahead and start with the first rule. Now, this one's pretty simple, pretty obvious, and if you live by this every day of your life, you'll stay out of trouble, and that is this. You have to be swift to hear and slow to speak. Swift to hear and slow to speak. Matter of fact, there's 2 verses out of James, Dale, if you would kind of read them for us. We're going to James 1:19 and then verse 26.
Well, in James 1:19 it says, "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath." Verse 26 says, "If anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless."
It's an interesting passage.
Well, it is, and you think about this. Everybody has heard the old saying, God gave us 2 eyes and 2 ears and only 1 mouth. So we should see twice as much and hear twice as much as we say. This is pretty much what James is saying here when he's talking about being swift to hear and slow to speak. And the other thought is, it's better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than to open it and remove all doubt.
That's absolutely true. And then, Jacob, you think about what verse 26 there, when he says, if anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue. That's a pretty powerful image, isn't it, about bridling the tongue?
Absolutely. It shows us that all of our religion can be in vain if we're not controlling our tongue. But John, I'm not talking on the internet. I'm just typing most of the time.
That's an interesting thought. So does the restraints go out the window when we type?
No, I don't believe so. But I'm afraid some people don't think of what they're doing as actually being the same as speaking. And a lot of times
Yeah.
people will type things that they wouldn't say to someone face to face.
That's right. You know, when you compare this to the time period that James wrote this, I would suspect, and I'm no historical scholar by any stretch, but I would suspect just through common sense that the average person today communicates with their hands via writing or typing more than the average person in the first century ever did.
Yeah.
You had
Yeah.
scholars who would write, and some people, but the majority of communication was verbal.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
Yep.
so, Ordell?
You think about this, though, what Jacob's saying there is we do a lot of writing, but what we're writing is exactly what we are saying in our mind.
Right.
And so when you get right down to it, we have to be very careful. And the best thing you can do when you're writing an email message or anything else is go ahead and write it, but then let it sit there before you send it. And particularly if you're writing something because you're a little upset with someone, let it sit there for a day or two and come back and read it again. And I guarantee you'll change it and you'll recognize that some of the things you said in that email message should never have been said.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a child of God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll tell you what, Jacob, I'm going to have you read a passage for us. It kind of talks about the potential of the tongue, and this is James chapter 3, verses 2 through 10. James 3, verses 2 through 10.
Yeah, James chapter 3, beginning verse 2, really does give us some good imagery of how powerful our tongue is, and we don't realize it, I'm afraid, too often. James 3, beginning verse 2, for we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in the word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at the ships, although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned about by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature and is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird and of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless God and Father, and with it we curse men. We have been made after the similitude of men. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. You know, John, I can take even a wild lion and I can tame it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to do it personally, but people do. Tame that lion where they could put it in the same room with them and turn their back on it and not be worried that it would do something that would hurt them. But our tongues will never be that way. We'll never be able to ignore them. We're always going to have to watch what we say and be on guard because we can do great damage with our tongue.
I think that's a good point. And the imagery here is astounding, you know, the potential that the writer here talks about. And, you know, I have a question when he comes down to verse 8, when he says, but no man can tame the tongue. It says, it is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. Do y'all think he's saying there that it is impossible for any man to control what he says? Or do you think he may be indicating that it's impossible for mankind without God to tame the tongue? Or what are your thoughts on that, Dale? Let's start with you.
Well, first off, I think we can control the tongue. But as far as taming it, it's not an animal like the lion that Jacob's speaking of here. And certainly we can domesticate animals, we can tame them. But I would even suggest that with the lion, you turn your back and that lion could turn against you just in the snap of a finger. Just as your tongue, we can control it, but we're not going to tame it. And if we don't continue to control it, just as he was talking about the bits in a horse's mouth. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever ridden a horse or not, but if you have, you know the one thing you will not allow that horse to do is get that bit in their teeth, because once they get the bit in their teeth, they control you, and they will run away with you. Same thing with the ship here, the rudder. If you look at the size of the rudder compared to the ship, that is such a small piece. But if the cables directing that rudder break,
right,
then there's no way you can control the ship. The ship runs wild. The same thing with the tongue. We can control it, but we're not going to tame it. And if we do not constantly watch what we say and and conduct ourselves in a proper manner, the tongue will act just like that horse that grabs a bit in their teeth and runs away with you.
Jacob, that's kind of what you were saying in your comments just following that passage. It's not so much the idea of permanently taming, but the idea of controlling as long as you maintain hold of the reins.
It's not. This passage is not meant to be an excuse for, I said that, but nobody can control their tongue, and so I have an excuse. The passage is telling us you've got to control it. You're not going to be able to tame it. You're not going to be able to turn your back on your tongue and not worry about what you say, but you can control it, and that's the point of the passage.
That's right. Your dad has taught you well. Greg in the chat room says James 3 does not teach that the tongue cannot be controlled. It simply suggests it cannot be tamed or trusted, must always be kept under close control.
Yeah, he's helping me with the answers tonight.
He is. But I think that's the way to look at it, And especially what James was pointing out here is that you had people who were with the same mouth blessing God and cursing men. And I love his statement.
Right.
He says, "Brethren, these things ought not to be so."
Right.
And he's telling them it can be so. That is, you can control it and stop doing this.
Exactly.
Well, I want you to consider there are 3 passages from Proverbs. Proverbs is great for a wide variety of subjects that we're looking at here in regards to the things that we say and the things that we talk about. And one of the things in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 19, Solomon writes that in the multitude of words sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. It's the idea of restraining your lips. That individual is wise. Chapter 15, verse 2, he says, the tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth foolishness. If we don't keep our tongue controlled, and when we say our tongue, you and I both know, we're talking about your mental faculty to form words, which sometimes I have difficulty doing. That's what he's talking about, keeping control over. And then Proverbs 21, verse 23, whoever guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from troubles. And Solomon knew this. He recognized, and I tell you, if you just study, if you watch people, if you become a people watcher, and you just watch what they say, how they behave, you'll find that a lot of the problems come from people just not wanting to control what they say.
John, how many times have you heard someone say, well, I know I shouldn't say this, but...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And have you ever heard somebody say that and then they actually said something that they should have said? We know, a lot of times people know that they're saying things they shouldn't, but they just don't have the control that Proverbs tells us we need to have.
That's exactly right. Julia makes the point in the chat room. She says, it's interesting because what we say springs from our minds. It makes me think of Matthew 15, 16 through 20. What we say comes from our hearts, so we need to guard our hearts in order to watch our tongues. And that's true. Whether there's goodness or wickedness, it flows forth from the heart. So
that's right.
Any thoughts, Dale?
No, I agree with you, but think about, we're talking about the tongue here, and think about how many marriages end up in divorce because of the fact that the tongue is not being controlled.
Oh, absolutely.
And it takes 2 people to argue.
If every man would let their wife control what the man says, be fine. Happy marriage.
I don't know about you, but when my wife starts arguing with me, I just get up and go to another room.
Mine follows me.
She follows you?
Yeah.
Well, in that case, I'd keep my mouth shut.
There you go. And that's it. Because what happens, and we're going to talk about emotional release here in just a few minutes. That's kind of our next point that we're going to be getting into. But oftentimes, it is that lack of exercise regarding controlling the tongue and those moments of an emotional outburst that get us into more trouble.
Gets us fired from our jobs.
Absolutely. But don't go too much farther. I want to save that for the next section.
Oh, you want to save that for the next section?
I do.
All right.
But let me ask you to do this if you would. Ask yourself the following questions before sending out your next Twitter or your next Facebook status. Think about these things for a moment. Can someone take your comment the wrong way? Measure it carefully. And think about it. There was a young man, and I don't think he intended anything by this, but he put a status on his Facebook that the majority of the women were going to find offensive. And so I sent him a quick message because he was young and I wanted him to live a long time. I told him, I said, you know, you need to pull that down because some people are going to be offended by that. And he immediately said, you're right, I didn't think about it. So he went ahead and pulled it down. You need to look at it from every possible direction there.
Well, and it's not just the comments, but it's the pictures that we put over the internet as well, Facebook or Twitter. I know, in fact, she's my niece, got married, and she's sending pictures of their honeymoon throughout to all of her friends and everything, wearing a bikini. Now, what kind of message is that? And she's a Christian. What kind of message is that sending from a Christian? I know another young man who is living in an apartment by himself. He sends out over the Facebook pictures of all these empty beer bottles sitting on his coffee table. And he's a Christian. Now, what kind of message is that sending? So it's not just the verbal, but it's the nonverbal as well.
That's right.
So we have to be very careful about what we say and what we do.
I think that's a good point. And, you know, a lot of this we're talking about our tongue and what we say, but that's an excellent point. You know, what type of pictures do we post? Look in the background. See what's in the background before you post the picture. The foreground may be benign, but what's back there that could offend someone? You know, and you don't want to post anything that's going to offend. And the other thing is, are you passing along information that is private or not intended for public knowledge? There's so many things you need to ask yourself. Sometimes it may be better just to say, good morning, I hope everybody has a great day. You know, a few little other things. I'm going to McDonald's, you know. So, any thoughts, Jacob?
I agree. We've got to make sure that we keep what we say in check, and make sure that what we say is going to be beneficial to everyone that hears it.
Absolutely. Well, we are going to go ahead and pull our first break. We're only going to have two because there's a lot of discussion with this, and so we're just going to put in 2 breaks tonight. And on the other side of the break, we're going to look at rule number 2, and that's going to have to deal with not letting these updates in our status and profiles be a release for an emotional or a wrathful outlet. So stay tuned. We will be right back.
Hello, I'm Ron Witt, one of the elders of the Seminole Point Church of Christ. On behalf of the elders and members of the Seminole Point Church of Christ, I would like to invite you to be our guest at any of our worship services and Bible classes. The meeting place of the Seminole Point Church of Christ is located at 16300 North May Avenue, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, zip code 73013. The Seminole Point Church of Christ meets Sunday mornings at 9:30 for Bible classes, 10:30 for worship service, and 5 p.m. for our afternoon worship service. We also have Bible classes on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. In addition to our regularly scheduled Bible classes and worship services, we also have a Bible class on Tuesday morning at 10, this live netcast at 7:30 p.m., and a ladies' Bible class which meets once a month. Whether you live in Oklahoma City area or you are traveling through Oklahoma City, we would love to have you come and be our guest. We have Bible classes for all ages. Now, let us return to our study.
Welcome back. If you're just now joining us, we are considering the subject of rules and warnings for our social networking. And we have joining us this evening Jacob Gwynn from Columbia, Tennessee. His father's, Greg Gwynn, preaches for the College View Church of Christ. And Jacob, you attended the College View congregation as well, don't you?
I do, yes.
Okay. I thought so.
I'm actually in Jennings, Florida tonight, John. I'm not even in Columbia, Tennessee.
Ah, so you look a little brighter and cheery.
Yeah, it's hot down here.
Nice suntan.
Yeah,
yeah, right.
Just don't send us any pictures.
Okay.
But there's a comment came across in the chat room. Actually, a couple of them. I'm going to go ahead and bring to the foreground real quick. Rhonda writes, we must make sure we keep our kids' Facebook, Twitter, and texting in check. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of the child. The Solomon writer wrote that. And we need to make sure to correct them quickly if they post something they should not. And that's a good point. Even someone that's 18 years old, I still think foolishness is still bound up in that heart. And if they've not gotten many swipes from the rod of correction, it's probably a good mound of foolishness. And they're liable to put something on there that they shouldn't put on there. And then Greg says it's not just what those folks are saying. What is disturbing is what they are doing, what they're engaged in. Kind of like the pictures that Dale was talking about, I suspect. Talking about is bad enough, but the real problem is that their involvement in such things proves their hearts are far from right. Yeah.
You know, they obviously don't have any problem with what they're doing, or they wouldn't put pictures up. You know, if I was doing something I shouldn't, I'd be ashamed of it. I wouldn't want other people to know about it. That shows that they really don't... they don't see any problem with what they're doing, and that's sad.
I do know of one particular situation where you had a family who they had a little bit more liberal thoughts on what they can wear when they go out to the beach, and they uploaded some pictures to Facebook thinking that it wasn't going to post until they hit publish. Well, they did post, and one of the members, you know, saw it and contacted me, so I turned around and called them real quick, and they, not wanting to offend anybody, and they were quite upset themselves, they pulled them down. You know, and my thoughts were, sometimes if you have a little more liberal views on things, you have to keep that in mind, that you are going to offend somebody, and the fact is you should probably rethink your liberal views on those things. But anyway,
well, yeah, you know, posting the picture is one thing, but what about someone who actually saw you dressed that way in person?
Yeah,
you can't pull those down.
No, that's absolutely right. Let's see if there's anything else. Paul makes the point that sometimes our glimpse into people's lives are very uncharacteristic of godly lives, and it is not that it becomes public; it is that it is, you know. And they are living an ungodly life, and we see that. And so if we can help them to turn, and we can do so, if we can set a good example for them, by all means, we must be doing that. But let's look at our next rule here. Do not use your social networking services as an outlet for anger or emotional release. We have to remember the simple fact that the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Dale, I'd like to read again, and if you would, read James chapter 1. This time read verses 19 and 20, and then again verse 26, please.
James says, "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God." Verse 26 says, "If anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless."
All right, notice what he says there in verse 20. For the wrath of man, it does not produce the righteousness of God. And then we pull that into the context again. If the individual doesn't bridle his tongue, he deceives his own heart. And his religion is useless. His worship of God is useless. You think about in Matthew chapter 15, verse 9, where Jesus there was criticizing the Pharisees and quoting from Isaiah. He said, "In vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrine the commandments of men." If I inwardly and therefore then outwardly say things and do things that are ungodly, then how can I expect to worship God in such a manner that God would find acceptable? I think about what Paul says regarding the husband in 1 Peter chapter 3, there in verse 7, where basically he tells the husband that if he doesn't dwell with his wife with understanding, giving honor to her as unto the weaker vessel, that his prayers will be hindered. Now that tells me right there, if a man doesn't treat his wife the way that he should, God is not going to hear his prayers. And of course that would apply to verbal communication with his wife as well. And I think it's something we need to take to heart. We cannot allow our anger to be that which feeds our level of communication. Any thoughts, Greg?
Absolutely.
Or Jacob?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, someone might say, well, it's just, I have a little problem with my temper, and I say some things that I shouldn't. It's not just a little problem. It's a major problem, and it needs to be fixed, and we need to control it because it can hinder our whole religious service to God.
Well, great. Jacob, I'm going to do this several times tonight.
That's okay.
Read for us Ephesians 4, 26 and 27 there, because it basically says the very same thing that you said.
Yeah, Ephesians 4, beginning verse 26, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down in your wrath, nor give place to the devil." It's okay to be upset. But the way we handle that emotion is what counts.
That's the thought. Don't give place to the devil with that anger. Don't allow him into your life. David put a good point there in the chat room. We're talking about examples, and I think in just a moment here we're going to kind of connect how the emotional outlet affects our language. But David makes a good point. He says we can also set bad examples by the Facebook friends we select who use inappropriate language. He says, I've had to speak to a couple of Facebook friends about the comments their friends post. And it's interesting. I have seen some Christians forward or repost some funny tale or funny story or some joke that in reality had cursing and swearing in it. And just because it's funny doesn't mean that it can be pushed forward. We got to keep that in mind. I think it's a very, very solid point. As a matter of fact, Dale, why don't you read for us Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, and then we're going to look at Colossians 3:8.
Ephesians 4:29 says, "Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers." And then Colossians the 3rd chapter, verse 8 says, "But now you yourselves are to put off all these, anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth."
When you think about especially verse 8 of Colossians chapter 3, we know that no corrupt word is to come forth, Ephesians 4:29. But Colossians 3:8 tends to tie anger, wrath, malice, and blasphemy with filthy language. The idea of someone speaking as a result of being an emotional outburst. And a lot of people curse and swear because they get angry. They get mad about something or another. And he says that we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to keep control over that.
Well, not only that, but you think about it, how many friendships are lost because of anger. It really takes a lifetime to develop a true friendship.
That's true.
A relationship. And it's particularly if you're trying to study with someone who is not a Christian, you're trying to reach out to them and help them realize that there's no greater joy than being a brother or sister in Christ. And then you get angry with them and you lose that. It takes that lifetime, but it only takes 30 seconds to destroy that relationship.
That's right.
And once you destroy it, it's very, very difficult to get it back. And this is why God has so much to say about anger and wrath.
I think that's a good point because of how damaging it is.
John, I was just thinking, when I get angry in person and I'm going to say something, it doesn't take very long for the anger to come out in my tongue if I'm not careful. But with the typing on the internet, it takes time to type, and I've got to look at what I'm saying, and it looks like we ought to be able to control some of that anger a little bit better than we do sometimes.
Well, that's true. And what's interesting in the comparison between typing and speaking, with speaking, you can put little, inflections in your tone to kind of soften what it is you're saying, or to kind of give a little hint of joking. But with typing, you can't do that. Even an LOL or something else won't hide what you're actually trying to say.
Well, this is why I say that when you type something, walk away from it, sit on it for a little while, and then come back and read it again, and make the appropriate changes before you send it out.
That's right. That's right.
You will never regret what you do there if you'll do that.
One thing that's come across in the chat room that kind of ties with this, okay, because from the standpoint that once you say something, it's already out there. Rhonda makes the comment about viewing other people's pictures. She says, I'm reminded of the verse, be sure your sin will find you out, from Numbers 32, verse 23, which brings on the responsibility of others to talk to them about the way they are choosing to live their life or the way they're choosing to talk. And a little bit later in our study, we're going to find that whether it be in the cyber world or in one-on-one, nothing truly is private, and we have to keep that in mind. Proverbs 15, verse 4 says, a wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit. And then David in the chat room says, Proverbs 18:19, brother offended is harder to win than a strong city, and contentions are like the bars of a castle. Going right along there, Dale, with what you were saying. So, something very, very important to keep in mind. Jacob, any thoughts?
Well, I agree. You know, it doesn't take long to say something we'll regret, and we've got to make sure that we're not allowing our emotions to dictate the way that we communicate.
Exactly right. Matter of fact, why don't you consider the following guidelines when you're faced with a situation where anger or any type of emotion, you know, we're connecting this with anger. But there have been a lot of sins of passion, even of a sexual immorality that began with wrong words. And you have to keep this in mind. So any type of emotional release must be kept in check. Ask yourself the question, or consider this guideline. Do not air your family problems over a public forum or even in private to individuals. I've seen so many people on their Facebook status gripe about their mom and dad or their brother or sister or their, some family member. Don't do that. If it's private, keep it private, because once it's out there in the public, you're not going to pull that thing back in. Do not air your complaints regarding your work or your co-workers at work. There was I researched on the internet to try to find the one story I was thinking about earlier. I discovered there are several cases recorded in the news where an individual has been fired because of something they put in their Facebook status about their work or their co-workers. And so they think, I'm venting, it's not going to hurt anything. It does hurt things. Don't complain about your friends. Keep your complaints to yourself. If they're guilty of sin, call them. If it's something that's hurting your friendship, you go talk to them about it. But don't use a public forum to air it. And don't say anything of which you'll later be ashamed once the emotions and the anger subsides. That's the thing to remember. When you're angry, when your emotions are high, you don't think clearly. And later you'll end up regretting things that you've done based on those emotions. You need to keep that in mind. Very, very important. Very important.
You know, all of these guidelines that you just mentioned, John, also takes another sin in consideration. That's gossip.
You know, that's a good point. That's a very good point. And I'm glad you said that, and I'll tell you why. There's a story I heard a number of years ago. I wanted to tell this story, and it fits now.
It's not gossip, is it, John?
Gossip?
No, this is a good one.
He's gossiping, Jacob.
Yeah. Don't tell anybody I said this, guys. It's just between you and me, okay? Anyway, the story is told one time of an individual who kind of spread a rumor about someone in town. They only told a couple people, but then they told a couple people. And someone's reputation was hurt. So they were trying to figure out how they can make it right. And so they went to talk with someone about it. And the person said, okay, there's one thing that you can do for me. I want you to take this box of feathers, and I want you to go pour it out on my front porch and then come back in. So he did that, went back in the house. But what he didn't realize how windy the day was. When he walked back outside, all the feathers were gone. And the person said, now, if you can go and collect all those feathers, then you might be able to make right what you did. The point is, once we say it, it's gone. And you cannot take it back. And so I think gossip is a perfect illustration of what we're speaking about here. Any other thoughts, Jacob?
I agree. Got to be careful about what the words that we type on the internet.
That's right. Greg in the chat room says a recent Pew Research poll reported that 1 out of 5 adults uses Facebook for flirting. That falls right into the category of what we're talking about. And that's sad. But it is. That's the way it is. So, I'll tell you, we need to take our last break for the night, so stay tuned. And on the other side of the break, Dale, what are we going to be looking at?
Well, we're going to look at the third area, and that's that we should not lie on our Facebook and our internet and our Twitter and all that.
Sweet and simple.
Sweet and simple.
That's right. So stay tuned, and we will be right back.
Hi, I'm Rhonda. I'm a member of the Seminole Point Church of Christ in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The Seminole Point Church of Christ has outstanding Bible classes for all ages. We have teachers who are dedicated to teaching God's Word in insightful and energetic ways. Please come visit us and bring your children. They will love our Bible classes, and you will be benefited.
Hello, my name is Dale Decker. I am one of 4 elders here at Seminole Point Church of Christ. We are very fortunate to have a Bible-loving group of Christians here at Seminole. We have 7 deacons that work very hard in making sure that those things that are not directly related with the teaching and preaching of God's Word are done. Our Bible class teachers are second to none. We have Bible classes for all age groups. Our goal is heaven, and we make every effort to ensure that the Word of God is taught at every age group. We hope that you will come and check us out. You will find that we are a very friendly and loving congregation. We are located at 16,300 May Avenue in Oklahoma City. And now back to our study.
You know, one of the things that we need to remember about lying is you do not have to tell an out-and-out lie in order to be deceiving. Many times you can tell a half a truth and walk away thinking, hey, I've told the truth, when in reality you've misled. And to mislead someone is to deceive someone. And that is essentially the thought, the idea of lying there. You know, people may be tempted to embellish, or you might say fabricate the truth in their various statuses they put on Facebook or the statuses they put on Twitter. They kind of alter the truth a little bit there to maybe improve their standing in the public. And that we'll talk about that here a little bit later about self-glorification. But sometimes, you know, you can tell a half-truth and realize no one's going to know the difference. No one's going to know any better about what you've just done. The fact of the matter is, God knows. Whether it's an insinuation or it's an out-and-out lie, it's still a lie. But you know,
maybe we're tempted by the anonymity of it all, John, that I can say these things and no one really on the other end can check up what I'm saying. And so if you can't validate what I'm saying, maybe it's, you know, it's okay to stretch the truth a little bit.
You know, that's true. I've known some people that even in a casual one-on-one conversation, the fish they caught gets bigger with every time they tell it. You know.
Yeah.
And it's not natural, but it makes sense that behavior would pass right along to the social networking world with all their updates and everything. And the fact
again, we're not talking about new temptations here. We're just talking about different avenues for them.
That's exactly right. As a matter of fact, Jacob, go ahead and read for us Ephesians. We're going to look at three passages. The first one, if you would, read Ephesians 4, verse 25, please.
Yeah, Ephesians 4:25 says, "Therefore, putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another." So that would apply if I'm talking to you face to face, John. It also apply if I'm writing you something over the internet.
Exactly. And you know, in the context of Ephesians 4, it's the idea of putting off the old man of sin and putting on our life in Jesus Christ, Jacob. It's that. And so if we're going to put on Jesus Christ, that is His life, if we're going to walk in fellowship with Him, then lying is one of the things that we have to put off.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, Dale, what about Colossians 3, 9 and 10?
Paul said, "Do not lie to one another, since you have put off the old man with his deeds, and have put on the new man, who is renewed in knowledge according to the image of Him who created him."
Notice what he says there, Dale. He says, do not lie to one another. And this goes back to the same thought. For you have put off the old man with his deeds and put on the new man. Some people say, some scholars suggest that Ephesians and Colossians are parallel epistles. Mm-hmm. And Paul, likely wrote them around the same time because he covers much of the same information within both of them. And in both aspects, it's the idea of putting off that old man of sin, no longer lying to one another. Peter, in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 10, he tells us what we need to do in order to love life and see good days. And we're jumping into the middle of this particular excerpt, but he says, "For he who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit." I've seen so many people's lives become miserable because they lied, and they were deceitful.
Man, it is a vicious circle. You've got to continue that deceit to cover up the deceit before, and on it goes. We could rephrase 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 10, "For he would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue," or let him refrain his fingers from evil, and his fingers that they type no deceit.
Absolutely. And with the newer smartphones like the Android phones, you can literally speak your text. That's
okay. Yeah.
So.
Well, don't rub it in, John. We don't have that technology yet.
You'll get it in Tennessee pretty soon.
Okay.
I think Florida's got it. But
all right.
And those in the chat room, we'd love to hear from you. Kevin makes the point that social networking began with handles. Now, this is a good point, and this shows Kevin's age a little bit, too, and we won't talk about that. But social networking began with handles and bulletin board systems and has migrated towards avatars and other acting. That may be the issue in how people view social networking. And that's a very good point. There's one glorified chat program called Second Life that you can go in and talk with people, have a little avatar, and it's a great way of teaching. You can encounter people from all over the world, but some people, literally, it becomes a life, and that becomes their life, and it's a way of escape, and they do things there they would never do in the real life situation there. And it's just another means of a form of wrapping your life around something that's not true. Let's see, and Rhonda makes a point about those avatars can be very lifelike, and the social networks you form within those particular areas can also be very, very disturbing as well. And then David makes a point. Good point with avatars. People can pretend to be something they're not. You know, we can do that without avatars, but David's right about that. It just makes it easier. Talking about your anonymity there. Jacob, any thoughts?
Well, John, we're just talking over and over again about ways that the devil can tempt us here, and maybe some of the things that we're doing on the internet are not wrong in and of themselves, but they do open up an avenue for the devil to tempt us, and maybe we need to say, okay, I'm going to draw a line here. I'm not going to allow the devil to have that temptation.
Draw the line in the sand.
That's right.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you take your kid to the Grand Canyon, if I ever do that, I'll probably be a hair bit paranoid and tell them, 10 feet to the edge is close enough. We're not getting any closer. So we need to establish a line. That's right.
They do have guardrails to protect them.
Yeah, but my kids, if they inherited my clumsiness, that won't help a whole lot.
Probably so.
Yeah. Well, let's consider a fourth area. We've got about 13 minutes or so in the study tonight. I think we get another one in. And when putting this lesson together, I've often thought about this, and I've seen it more, I think, in Facebook status updates, or at least see the concern there. And that is, we do not need to use our social networking services as a means of self-glorification or self-elevation. Okay? And then think about that. Here you have Facebook and your status and Twitters and what other programs that will let you do status updates, let the world know what you're doing. It'd be very easy to brag, very easy to say the right thing, pick out the right verse, to paint a picture of yourself that fundamentally is not true. But people who don't know you, they see the statuses and think, wow, what a godly man he is. And if our motives is for self-glorification, then we're no different than the Pharisees, we'll talk about here in just a moment. Jacob, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree, John, and I'm afraid I see it on the internet. People are getting on and they're bragging about what they do and how good they are, and they might not do that in person, and they may not see what they're doing as being that, but it is, and I'm afraid that God views it similarly to the way that He viewed people in the New Testament who are doing the same thing.
Exactly. Matter of fact, Dale, let's look at a couple passages. These are going to come from Matthew chapter 6, excerpts here from this particular chapter. And it uses the Pharisees to illustrate for us this very important lesson. Let's look first off at Matthew 6, verse 5.
Matthew 6, verse 5 says, "And when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly I say to you, they have their reward."
Now, Jesus here is not condemning or looking down upon public prayers, is he, Dale?
No, what he's condemning is the fact that the Pharisees here were trying to pretend to be something that they weren't.
Okay.
And oftentimes our young people and even older people on the internet, whether it be through Facebook or email or whatever, they're bragging about the fact of how they deceived their parents or how they deceived their wife or their husband or some other friend or the school teachers. And so, they've sinned in a number of ways. But the problem is that oftentimes when we get and we use this technology and everything, we forget about our Christianity because most of the people we're associating with are not Christians.
And they're not there with you.
They're not with us.
Yeah.
So we can brag about a lot of things, and the problem is that we're not doing anything positive as far as getting these individuals to recognize the importance of following God.
That's right. That's right.
And it doesn't have to be deceitful. You know, I don't have my boasting doesn't have to be deceitful to try and convince people that I'm something that I'm not. It can just be boasting about what I'm doing.
Exactly right.
And we need to not let the left hand know what the right hand's doing.
That's right. That's right. Look at verse 7 now, Matthew chapter 6, using again the Pharisees as another example. He says, when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathens do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. And then let's look at one more, verse 16. He says, moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites with a sad countenance, for they disguise their faces that they may appear to men to be fasting. And surely I say to you, they have their reward. You know, and it's that idea of saying, look at what I'm doing. I'm fasting. I'm doing good deeds. Why, the other day we took 15 cases of apples over to this poor family, you know. And if the motive is for the purpose of building up one's own self, for that self-glorification, then the motives is all wrong. If a kind deed is not done out of love, it's essentially worthless regarding the individual who has done that deed. Any thoughts?
No, I'm reminded of a story that I once used in a sermon that I preached several years ago about an individual who was asked, if you could only have one wish, what would it be? And he said, I would like to be able to go, and wherever my shadow is cast, that good would be done without me knowing about it. Now, that is really the attitude of Christians should have. We don't need to brag about anything. We don't need to try to boast or build ourselves up. Just be a good child of God, and good will be done.
That's right.
And people will see it because you don't have to tell anybody. They just see that you're doing good.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Jacob, any thoughts?
I agree. I like some of the passage you got here from Proverbs, chapter 25, verse 27. It is not good to eat much honey, so to seek one's own glory is not glory. And a lot of self-promotion, a lot of inflation of one's importance going on the Internet. And there is a problem, John, that the Internet's making people, it seems to be narcissistic. Or where they think that the world revolves around them and that they've got 250 people following them on whatever the social network might be, and these people actually do care what I eat for lunch.
That's right. That's right. You know, and I think that's a very good point. Jacob had sent me a link early in the week on an article that dealt with narcissism in Facebook. And it's a perfect place for it, you know. And if you don't know what narcissism means, if you can spell narcissism, which I can't, you need to do that, Google it, and you'll get an idea. But it's the idea of being consumed with oneself. What you think, what you know, what you care about. Everybody else has got to care about what you care about because you only care about the important stuff, you know. And,
Right.
and if they ain't important to them, then, hey, they're not worth caring about. And Facebook is really a door for opening up that release. Yeah.
Right.
We got a couple of things that came over in the chat room, and the chat room took their own line of discussion for just a few minutes here, but I think it's a good discussion, so I'm going to take a moment and bring it back in because it does relate to the idea of what we're talking about in the rules and warnings for social networking. Greg, he wrote earlier, says, I can't believe parents let their kids access the social sites without supervision. What are they thinking? And that's right. Because your kid's foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. And if you're using that rod of correction to drive it far from him, you're just creating an even worse situation when you allow your kid to have unsupervised access to the Internet. And let's see. Paul says, he says he uses a program called Norton Family Online to monitor. And that's not a bad idea. If you're going to be letting your kids on the Internet unsupervised, you better have something watching over them in the background to either control where they go to or at least keep a record so that you can go back and monitor it. And Kevin says, let's see. Oh, and now Kevin kind of brings us back to our discussion a little bit. He says, if someone finds out about something I've done, I've always felt that my deed was in vain, meaning some good for someone that I've done is what he's talking about there. And it's that idea, if we do it simply be seen by others, and of course there's no merit in it whatsoever. And then Rhonda says, we are responsible for our kids. If we do not keep an ever watchful eye on them, Satan will get hold of them via the World Wide Web. And then David puts forth the caution, we need to make sure we're not guilty of judging the motives of others either, or think of their wanting to share good news as being self-promoting. And that is a good point. And the warning here, the caution isn't so much so that we can judge other people's motives, but it's to judge our own selves.
And I like David's caution.
Yeah.
And we're not in the business of judging motives, but we do realize that it is a danger, and we just need to throw the caution out there and say we've got to be aware of it, and we need to be on guard.
I think that's exactly right there. If you want to make the world walk right, you start with yourself first. You get yourself in fellowship with God and behaving the way that you should, then you can kind of begin to help others. It's kind of the thought there. Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, he says in Galatians 6, verse 1, that if anyone is overtaken in a fault, you who are spiritual restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness. And essentially, you give consideration to yourself lest you also be tempted. You don't want to have an arrogant attitude about that. So we must first start with our own self at home and make certain that everything that we do in our lives, that we don't do it for our own self-glorification, our own self-elevation. We just do it because it's the right thing to do. And, you know, Jacob, I remember, especially when I was younger, I've been around some preachers, and I like to pick on preachers. You know, I'm in that territory, so I can pick on them a lot. But have you ever been in a conversation, or at least heard one, where you hear someone say, well, you know, last week was God really blessed us. We baptized 3 people last Sunday. And then the other guy says, well, you know, that was good, but we did 10 people the month before. And then someone else says, you know, guys, you're really working hard at it, but we really hit the mother lode a year ago. We baptized 200 people, you know, and it keeps going. And why?
Yeah. Well, it just shows you that no one's immune to the temptation. And those who are preachers, those who are, it doesn't matter what we are, we've got to make sure that we're on guard.
Exactly.
And that we're not doing it.
Now, I'll tell you what, there are some times when you want to share good news. And you hear good news, it spawns good news, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you just scratch your head and wonder sometimes. But like David said, we're not talking about this so that we judge the motives of others. We're talking about ourselves.
You know, I think there's a big difference between good news and bragging.
Okay.
The Pharisees, everything they were doing was in essence bragging. It was a pretense. They were doing things to be seen of men. But if my wife and I had a new baby, and I put that out on the internet and let all my friends know that, hey, we just had a baby girl or a baby boy, and mother and baby are doing fine, that's not bragging. That's just sharing good news.
But if you say it's the best-looking baby in the world, Dale, you might be crossing the line.
Well, it is the best-looking baby
in your
in the world.
eye. That's right.
But I wasn't going to say that, Jacob.
Okay.
Well, in the chat room, in response to the caution that David had put up there, and it was a very good point, we do need to rejoice with those who rejoice. Rhonda says, rejoice with those that rejoice, weep with those that weep, quoting from Romans 12, verse 15. And let's see, Greg makes the good point from Proverbs 27, verse 2, let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips. And then David says, don't you just love those preachers' luncheons? Yes. You know. And, you know, I tell you what, I knew someone years ago that was preaching, and he's no longer preaching now, but he spoke a lot about wanting to hold gospel meetings, and that was really, really his great concern as a young preacher. And he was really bothered because he wasn't being asked to hold many gospel meetings. And I told him one time, I said, you know, the problem is you don't need to try to sell yourself. You just preach the Word. Preach the Word, you do a good job. Let everything else come as it does. If people hear it and they think that you're doing fine and that they'd love for you to come hold a gospel meeting, that's great, that's wonderful. But you can't sell yourself. And of any industry, if I was going to go and do what you did for a living in being a drug representative, there are times when you're in the actual world that you have to sell yourself in order to get hired at a job. But as Christians and as preachers, we don't sell ourselves.
I'm afraid that there are some preachers who have maybe been influenced by some of those in the media who have used social networking to promote themselves, and I'm afraid there may be some preachers, John, who are using the social media for that. Again, we're not judging motives, but it does seem that there may be some preachers who are trying to promote themselves rather than the gospel with their internet.
That would be my fear for myself. If I was to put something on the internet that would somewhere or another tell about all the things that I'm doing, I would fear that people would look at that and think of it as self-promotion. Although it may not be, but I would be fearful of that myself.
Right.
Well, gentlemen, guess what? We have just now gone 2 minutes past an hour. So we need to go ahead and pull the study to a close. We will definitely continue this next week. We have a good bit of material that we want to cover. And I didn't want to rush through this. And the chat room has done a great job in helping us out with the study. We've said this before. Dell and I and John and Jacob, we can sit down and we can have a good study of the Bible. But when you join us and you help us in the chat room with your questions and your comments and your thought, it goes a long way to improving the quality of the study. You're able to help us remember things that we didn't even think about when we developed the lessons. And Jacob, I'm sure you and your dad on Thursday nights face the same thing, or enjoy the same thing, I should say.
Yeah, it's much more interesting for us and for the listeners, we believe, if everyone will join in and share their thoughts. It's just a large Bible study group over the internet, and so we're using the technology for something good, we think, and we're excited about it, as you are as well.
That's right. Tell them one more time when the virtual Bible study airs.
Thursday nights at 8 o'clock at thevirtualbiblestudy.com is where you can find us, and we'd like for you to join us there.
And that's Central Standard Time, right?
Central Standard Time, 8 o'clock Central Standard.
What is the topic you're speaking on right now?
We do various topics each week. We'd have a different topic. Sometimes it's motivated by what's in the news, a current event, or it may just be a topic that we feel like needs to be discussed. Maybe it's something that someone has suggested via a question. So we do a different topic each week, and they're not related, so you sort of have to check in each week to find out what we're talking about.
They will, from time to time, too, interview certain people that have been in the news through the means of the telephone. Yeah.
Right. We do that as well.
And you can even call into their program. They have an 800 toll-free line, don't you?
That's right, toll-free. You can call in, email, chat, similar like you have.
That's right. That's right. Well, listen, I appreciate everybody, your participation in joining us, and most importantly, we appreciate your interest in spiritual things. Dale, any final comments as we close the lesson?
No, I just want to echo what you said, that we really do appreciate our audience and the comments that they bring to us on the chat line. Mm-hmm. They certainly keep us straight, and they prevent us from bragging.
That's right. That's right. And if you're wanting to watch the last 2 weeks, I'm behind on getting those updated on our website. I hope to have those done in the next couple of days. We had a little glitch 2 weeks ago, and we didn't get a good quality recording of it. We have a backup recording, so the quality's not as good, but it'll be posted here in the next couple of days for you to go back and catch if you may have missed that. Jacob, any thoughts?
Nope. I appreciate the study, guys. Appreciate the thoughts. Good things we need to think about. We've got to be on guard. We can't let our guard down, especially in the digital age we live in today.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, my kind friends. Remember thevirtualbiblestudy.com this Thursday night at 8 o'clock Central Standard Time, and then next Tuesday at 7:30 right back here at scripturalway.org. Thank you very much, and have a very wonderful week.